Hello everyone. Welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and leave a comment down below so you won't miss more chilling bedtime stories that I'll be sharing with you. Now, tonight's tale takes us far north, into the icy streets of Anchorage, Alaska, and more specifically, into a room that has been whispered about for decades. A place where countless guests have reported strange sights, eerie sounds, and a feeling that someone, or something, never truly checked out. This is the story of room 209 of the Old Anchorage Hotel. It was a cold January evening in 1987 when Emily Carter, a British travel writer from London, arrived at the Old Anchorage Hotel. She had been working on a book about historic hotels across America, and the Anchorage establishment, built in 1916, had caught her attention. By the time she checked in, snow was falling steadily outside, blanketing 4th Avenue in silence. The yellow glow from the street lamps reflected against the icy sidewalks, and only the crunch of boots breaking through fresh snow could be heard. Inside, the hotel lobby was warm but unusually quiet. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, its sound echoing faintly off the wooden panels that lined the walls. The receptionist, a middle-aged man named Thomas Avery, greeted her with a polite but tired smile. When she requested a quiet room for the night, Thomas hesitated for just a moment before handing her the key to room 209. His pause was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but Emily, ever the observant writer, caught it. As she made her way upstairs, the atmosphere shifted. The staircase creaked under her weight, and the hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and dust, as if it hadn't been properly aired out in years. The wallpaper, once patterned with elegant golden swirls, had faded to a dull beige. A single bulb flickered near the end of the corridor, casting uneasy shadows that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. When she unlocked the door to room 209, a strange chill brushed across her skin, colder than the winter air outside. She shivered, though the radiator in the room was already on. The space was modest: a queen-sized bed, an oak writing desk, and a mirror standing opposite the window that overlooked the snowy street below. Yet there was something heavy in the air, a presence that made the room feel crowded, even though she was alone. That night, Emily sat at the desk, writing notes for her travel book. The scratching of her pen was the only sound until, faintly, she heard it, a whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind pushing against the old window frame. But the more she listened, the clearer it became. A voice, low, urgent, coming from the direction of the mirror. "Leave!" Emily froze, her pen slipping from her fingers. She turned her head slowly toward the mirror, but there was nothing unusual, just her own reflection staring back, her pale face tense with unease. She shook her head, telling herself it was exhaustion from her long travels. She returned to her notes, determined to ignore it. But then, the whisper came again, louder this time, more desperate. "Get out now!" Her heart pounded in her chest as she pushed back from the desk. She glanced at the door, considering whether to leave, but curiosity anchored her in place. As a writer, she had always chased stories, and something inside her insisted that if she left now, she would miss the very thing she had come to discover. The radiator clanked loudly, startling her, and when she looked back at the mirror, she swore she saw movement. Not hers, but another shadowy figure standing just behind her reflection. Emily spun around. The room was empty, silent. Her breathing grew uneven, the air in the room suddenly colder than before. She walked to the window and looked outside, hoping to ground herself in something normal. Snow was still falling, soft and slow. A couple walked hand in hand along the deserted street, their laughter muffled by the glass. For a moment, it reassured her, but when she turned back to the mirror, her reflection was gone. The glass showed the room behind her, the bed, the desk, the door, but not her. Emily stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. A wave of dread washed over her. She blinked rapidly, trying to convince herself it was a trick of the light, fatigue, anything logical. But then, from the glass, a pale hand pressed against the inside of the mirror, followed by the faint outline of a man's face. And that was when Emily remembered what Thomas, the receptionist, had muttered under his breath as she walked away earlier that evening. She hadn't paid much attention at the time, but now, the words rang clear in her mind. They never stay long in 209. Emily's heart raced as she stumbled backward from the mirror, her breath fogging in the cold air that seemed to pour out of nowhere. The pale hand pressed against the glass lingered only a few seconds before fading away, leaving behind her reflection once more, though something about it still felt off. Her face looked strained, hollow-eyed, like she hadn't slept in weeks. She shook her head and told herself it was exhaustion, but the pit in her stomach knew better. She decided she needed answers. Still clutching her notebook, Emily slipped out of room 209 and hurried back downstairs. The lobby was nearly empty, except for Thomas behind the front desk, who looked surprised to see her so soon. "You look pale, Miss Carter," he said softly, adjusting his glasses. "Is the room not to your liking?" Emily hesitated, searching his eyes. "Thomas, you paused before giving me that key. Why, what is it about room 209? The man exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. His gaze flickered toward the staircase, as though wary of being overheard. Finally, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're not the first to ask," he admitted. "Room 209 has a reputation, though management prefers not to speak of it. Guests report whispers, shadows, cold drafts. Some claim to see a man in the mirror. A man who died in that very room in 1953. Emily's throat tightened. "Who was he?" Thomas glanced around before replying. "A police officer, James Jim Harrington. He was investigating a case downtown when he booked a night here. No one knows exactly what happened, but the staff found him in his room the next morning, lifeless, with no sign of struggle, no wounds. Some say it was his heart giving out. Others," Thomas paused, his expression darkening. "Others say he was pushed to it by something unseen. Since then, people whisper that he never left." Emily scribbled notes in her book, her curiosity burning even as her nerves screamed at her to leave. "And the whispers? What do they say?" Thomas's jaw tightened. Most who hear them say it's the same words. Warnings, to leave before it's too late. Her skin prickled. That was exactly what she had heard. Despite his caution, Emily decided she needed to return to the room. As a writer, she knew this was a story too powerful to abandon. She thanked Thomas, returned upstairs, and opened the door once more. The cold hit her immediately, sharper than before. The radiator hissed but gave off no warmth, as though the machine itself was being strangled by the unseen presence. She set her notebook on the desk and steadied her breathing. "If you're here," she whispered to the empty air, "I want to understand. Tell me your story. For a long time, nothing happened." She almost convinced herself she had imagined everything earlier. But then, The faint scratching sound of a pen echoed across the room. Emily froze. Her notebook was still closed on the desk. The sound grew louder, like someone frantically writing words on paper. She opened the book, and her breath caught in her throat. Words had appeared on the page. They lied. I was not alone. Her hand trembled as she touched the ink. It was fresh, glistening slightly under the dim lamp. She could smell the iron tang of it, too sharp to be ordinary pen ink. Emily forced herself to keep calm. She asked softly, "Who lied? About what?" The room seemed to breathe. The curtains stirred though the window was closed, and once again the pen moved across her notebook, scrawling out words in a hurried, uneven hand. "They came for me. They never caught him. He still walks." Emily's blood ran cold. She remembered Thomas saying Jim Harrington had been a police officer. Was this ghost trying to tell her he was killed? Not by illness, but by someone else? A murderer? The mirror rattled suddenly, as though something slammed against it from inside. Emily spun around. The faint outline of the man's face appeared again, clearer this time. His eyes were hollow, dark pools filled with pain. His lips moved, though no sound came out. Emily approached slowly, whispering, "Jim, is that your name?" For a brief moment, the figure nodded. Then, with sudden violence, the mirror cracked down the center, the sound like a gunshot. Emily stumbled back, clutching her chest. Her heart thundered in her ears. She knew she couldn't spend the night here, but she also couldn't walk away without digging deeper. The next morning, Emily went to the Anchorage Public Library. The building, with its tall windows frosted with snow, felt safer, grounded in reality. She searched through old newspapers on microfilm, scrolling through faded headlines from the 1950s. Hours passed, until finally she found it. Anchorage Daily Times, dated February 17, 1953. Local officer found dead in hotel room. Cause of death uncertain. The article described Officer James Harrington, 34 years old, found unresponsive in his room at the old Anchorage Hotel. The official report listed sudden cardiac failure as the cause. But in the smaller paragraphs, details emerged. A witness had seen him meeting with a man near the docks the previous night. That man was never identified. Emily leaned closer to the screen. Another article, dated a week later, mentioned rumors that Harrington had been investigating a string of disappearances tied to organized crime in Anchorage at the time. Several bodies had been found near Ship Creek, but no arrests had been made. The case was eventually abandoned. She took notes feverishly, her mind racing. Was Harrington silenced because he knew too much? And had his spirit been trapped in room 209 ever since, trying to warn others about the man who escaped justice? That evening, Emily returned to the hotel, determined to confront the presence once more. She brought with her an old tape recorder, hoping to capture whatever voice had whispered to her before. When she stepped into room 209, the air was heavier than ever. The cracked mirror loomed like a wound in the wall. She set the recorder on the desk, pressed the red button, and spoke clearly. "James Harrington, if you are here, I want to hear your story. Tell me what happened to you." At first, only silence. Then, the faint static on the tape began to shift. A voice emerged, distorted but unmistakably human. "They killed me. He is still here." Emily's hands shook as she rewound and played it back again. The words were clear, even though her own ears had heard nothing in the room. Her skin crawled. Suddenly, The lamp flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Emily fumbled for her flashlight, her pulse hammering. When she switched it on, the beam landed directly on the mirror. The cracked glass now showed not her reflection, but the figure of a man standing just behind her shoulder. His eyes glared with warning, his mouth opened wide, and this time she heard it. Not a whisper, but a roar. "Run!" Emily screamed, dropping the flashlight. The bulb shattered on the floor, plunging her into darkness again. She scrambled for the door, her hands shaking so violently she struggled to unlock it. Behind her, the mirror rattled violently, as though something was trying to break free. Finally, the door swung open, and she bolted into the hallway. The lights there flickered, but held steady. She didn't stop running until she was out in the freezing air of the street. Gasping clouds of white breath, her body trembling with fear. Yet even as she clutched her notebook to her chest, one thought repeated in her mind. She had proof now. Written words, a recorded voice. And more than that, she had a mystery that begged to be solved. Room 209 was not just haunted. It was a crime scene that had never been closed. The snow had thickened by the time Emily returned to her rented apartment in downtown Anchorage. She sat at the small wooden table, her hands trembling as she replayed the tape again and again. Each time, the static gave way to the same chilling words. "They killed me. He is still here." She barely slept that night. Images of the cracked mirror, the pale hand pressing against the glass, and the hollow eyes of James Harrington haunted her every time she closed her eyes. By dawn, she decided there was no turning back. She needed to know the truth, no matter how far the trail had gone cold. The next morning, she walked down G Street to a small diner called Arctic Rose Cafe, where she had arranged to meet a retired police officer named Robert McKinley. She had found his name in the archives. He had been a rookie on the force back in 1953, the year Harrington died. The diner smelled of bacon and strong coffee. A jukebox in the corner hummed quietly with an old country tune. Robert, now in his late 80s, sat in a booth near the window. His back was stooped, but his eyes were still sharp. When Emily introduced herself and explained her interest in Harrington, his expression hardened. "You don't waste time, do you?" he muttered, sipping his coffee. "Harrington's name hasn't crossed my ears in years. Most people have forgotten him. Maybe they want to." Emily leaned in. "Did you know him personally?" Robert nodded. "I did. He was good. Too good, maybe. He had a way of poking into places others were too scared to touch. Back then, Anchorage was changing fast. Oil money, fishing, construction, and with it came organized crime, gambling, smuggling, prostitution. Harrington had started looking into a man named Victor Kovacs, Hungarian immigrant, ran the docks with an iron fist. Nothing moved in or out of Anchorage without him knowing. Emily scribbled the name down. "Do you think Kovacs had Harrington killed?" Robert's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's the rumor. Harrington was seen meeting him the night before he died. But without proof, the department called it natural causes. Safer that way." He tapped his mug against the table. "But I always wondered, and I'll tell you this. When we found him in that room, the look on his face," he trailed off, shaking his head. "It wasn't a man dying in his sleep. It was a man staring at something he couldn't fight." Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What do you mean?" Robert's gaze locked onto hers. His eyes were wide open, his mouth frozen mid-scream, like he'd seen the devil himself. They sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the jukebox filling the space. Finally, Robert slid a small folded newspaper clipping across the table. "I kept this. Don't ask me why. Maybe because it never felt right." Emily opened it carefully. It was another article from 1953, a smaller piece buried in the back pages. It mentioned a second body found near Ship Creek only 2 days after Harrington's death. The victim was a dock worker with ties to Kovacs. His death was also ruled accidental. Emily's pulse quickened. 2 deaths within days, both connected to Kovacs, both brushed aside. "Where is this Victor Kovacs now?" she asked. Robert let out a bitter laugh. "If he's alive, he'd be ancient. But his family, they're still here. They own property, businesses. The Kovacs name carries weight, though most folks pretend not to know why." Emily thanked him, paid for his coffee, and stepped back out into the cold Anchorage air. Her mind buzzed. The pieces were fitting together, and Harrington's restless spirit wasn't warning her for nothing. That night, against her better judgment, Emily returned once again to room 209. She brought more than her tape recorder this time. She had copies of the articles, the clipping Robert had given her, and her notes. She wanted to see if showing Harrington the truth might ease his torment. The room greeted her with its familiar chill, though now the crack in the mirror had widened, a jagged scar running almost to the frame. She placed the documents on the desk and spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "James Harrington, I found your story. I know about Victor Kovacs. I know you were silenced. Is this what you wanted me to see?" The air thickened. The papers on the desk rustled as though stirred by invisible hands. Slowly, the pen lifted on its own and scratched across the page. Emily watched, her throat dry. "Yes, he walks in shadows. His name remains." Emily's knees trembled. Harrington wasn't just reliving his death. He was warning her that Kovacs's legacy still haunted the city. The lamp flickered violently, plunging the room into bursts of light and darkness. In one flash, she saw him in the mirror, clearer than ever. A man in uniform, his badge tarnished, his face twisted with sorrow. In the next flash, he was gone, replaced by another figure. This one was not Harrington. It was taller, broader, with a face half hidden in shadow. His eyes gleamed like embers, and his mouth curled into a grin that made Emily's blood run cold. She stumbled back, realizing this was not the spirit of the officer, but something else entirely. Perhaps the very thing Harrington had fought against. The mirror shook violently, and the words scratched onto her notebook shifted before her eyes, as though rewritten by another hand. "Leave her to me." Emily's scream echoed through the empty corridors of the old Anchorage hotel. She fled the room once more, but this time she knew she could not stop. The whispers in room 209 were not just a haunting, they were a battle. Harrington's soul was trapped, and something darker, something tied to Kovacs, had rooted itself in that mirror, feeding on fear, waiting for new victims. By the following day, Emily had made her decision. She couldn't simply write about this as a ghost story for her travel book. She needed to uncover the truth, to bring justice to a man who had been silenced for decades, and perhaps, in doing so, free him from the room that had become his prison. Her next stop would be to track down the Kovacs family. If the rumors were true, their names still carried weight in Anchorage. And maybe, just maybe, confronting the living could bring peace to the dead. But deep in her chest, Emily feared something else. What if the thing she saw in the mirror wasn't just tied to the past? What if it was waiting for her? Two days later, Emily found herself standing in front of a large stone building on the edge of downtown Anchorage. Snow had gathered thick on the roof and along the iron fence that surrounded the property. A bronze plaque near the gate read Kovacs and Sons Shipping Company, EST 1949. It was the same name she had traced from the old newspapers. The Kovacs family still owned part of the shipping industry, long after Victor himself had disappeared from public record. Emily adjusted her scarf, her breath visible in the frigid air. She had rehearsed her story. She was a writer, researching the history of Anchorage, particularly its maritime trade. She hoped that angle would give her a chance to meet a living member of the Kovacs family without raising suspicion. Inside, the building smelled faintly of sea salt and old wood. A receptionist in a navy blazer greeted her politely. "Do you have an appointment? I was hoping to speak with Mr. Kovacs," Emily said, her British accent softened by nerves. "I'm writing a historical piece, and his family's role in Anchorage is very important." The receptionist's eyes flickered with recognition. "You must mean Peter Kovacs. He's Victor's grandson. Give me a moment." Minutes later, Emily was led into an office lined with maritime charts and black and white photographs of the docks. Behind a heavy oak desk sat a man in his late 40s, his dark hair streaked with silver. His gaze was sharp measured. "Miss Carter, is it? Please sit." Emily thanked him and lowered herself into the leather chair opposite him. She noticed the framed photograph on the desk. An older man with stern features, standing proudly beside a fishing vessel. She recognized the face instantly. She had seen it in the newspapers, though much younger. It was Victor Kovacs. "I understand you're writing about Anchorage history," Peter said, folding his hands. "Yes," Emily replied carefully. "I'm especially interested in how the shipping industry shaped the city. Your family has been here for generations." Peter's lips twitched into something between pride and wariness. "That's true. My grandfather built everything you see. Hard work, discipline, and a little luck. Without him, Anchorage wouldn't have grown the way it did." Emily hesitated, then decided to take the risk. "I came across his name while researching another figure, Officer James Harrington. He died in 1953 in the old Anchorage Hotel. Do you know anything about that?" For the first time, Peter's expression hardened. The warmth drained from his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, studying her like a hawk. "That was a long time ago," he said flatly. "Why would you bring up something like that?" Emily kept her voice calm. "Because there are still unanswered questions. Harrington was investigating disappearances near Ship Creek. Your grandfather's name appeared in several reports. And she paused, weighing whether to reveal the haunting. "I believe Harrington was silenced before he could finish his work." Silence hung between them. The ticking of a brass clock on the wall filled the room. Finally, Peter let out a slow exhale and leaned forward. "You should be careful what stones you turn over in this city, Miss Carter. The past is heavy here, and sometimes it's better left buried." Emily's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I think Harrington would disagree." Peter's jaw tightened. He looked at the photograph of his grandfather on the desk, then back at her. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but unease. "Whatever you think you found," he said softly, "don't bring it into my family." We've carried enough shadows as it is. Emily left the office with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. The Kovacs family still guarded secrets. And Peter's reaction suggested he knew far more than he wanted to admit. That evening, unable to shake her unease, Emily returned to room 209 once again. The cracked mirror awaited her like a wound in the wall, the air heavy with tension. She placed her tape recorder on the desk and whispered, "James, I spoke to them. Your name still brings fear. What do you want me to do?" For a long time, nothing stirred. Then the lamp flickered, and the pen scratched violently across her notebook. The words were jagged, desperate. "Find the truth. End the name." Emily shivered. The message was clear. Harrington wanted her to bring the Kovacs' legacy into the light. But then, another line appeared beneath it, written in a different, darker hand. "You won't leave alive." Emily's blood froze. The two forces, Harrington and something else, were both using her notebook, fighting through her. The room felt charged with electricity, the air heavy with unseen rage. The mirror rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. For the briefest moment, she saw not just Harrington, but the darker figure again, the one with burning eyes. This time, its grin was wider. Closer. Emily slammed the notebook shut, grabbed the recorder, and ran from the room. The following day, she arranged to meet Robert McKinley again at the Arctic Rose Cafe. She told him about her encounter with Peter Kovacs, leaving out the more supernatural details. Robert frowned deeply. "I'm not surprised. The Kovacs family has always had power in this city, even after Victor died. But you're stirring dangerous waters, Emily." If Harrington was silenced, it wasn't just because of what he knew. It was because he threatened the foundation they built their empire on. Emily leaned forward. "Then I have to prove it. Harrington can't rest until I do." I saw it in his eyes. Robert's hand shook slightly as he set down his coffee cup. "You're talking like you've met him." Emily hesitated, then whispered, "I have." Robert studied her face. He saw the sincerity in her eyes, the fear she carried, and he didn't laugh. Instead, he sighed, as though confirming something he had always suspected but never admitted. "Then you'd better be ready," he said, "because if Harrington's ghost is with you, so are his enemies. And trust me, some things don't die easily." That night, Emily sat at her desk in the small apartment, staring at her notes spread across the table. Newspaper clippings, Harrington's case details, the Kovacs family tree. It was all there. She traced the lines with her finger, connecting names, dates, places. But then her eyes landed on something she hadn't noticed before, a detail in one of the old articles. Harrington had been investigating not only disappearances, but also whispers of a hidden ledger, a book that contained names, payoffs, and evidence tying the Kovacs empire to organized crime. A ledger that was never found. Emily's heart thudded. Could that be what Harrington wanted her to uncover? Was that why his spirit was still trapped in room 209? She closed her notebook and whispered into the night, "I'll find it, James. I'll finish what you started." But as the wind howled outside, rattling the thin windows, she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was listening. Something that didn't want her to succeed. As dawn began to creep across Anchorage, the heavy silence of the old Anchorage hotel settled once more. The whispers in room 209 had ceased, though the memory of them lingered with an icy grip. Guests still spoke in hushed voices, exchanging fragments of what they had heard or felt during the night. But none dared to linger near the door for long. For Margaret, and those who had chosen to remain, the morning light did not bring comfort, only the weight of questions that had no answer. The story of room 209 continued, weaving itself into the fabric of the city's lore. An unfinished tale that would echo through each new visitor who dared to spend the night there. And so, the whispers remain, unseen, unheard by most, but waiting, patient, and timeless for the next curious soul who crosses the threshold of the old Anchorage Hotel. Sleep well tonight, dear listener. If you can.